Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. I'm going to be explaining what I'm doing on this video so you understand how I built the knife that you'll see at the end. This project starts by going to the pre-cut, I already pre-cut it, steel for building a pattern welded Damascus billet. And this green basket here contains my 15N20 steel that I have meticulously cut by hand with a cutoff wheel on an angle grinder from large sawmill blades that I got from a guy who got them from a sawmill in North Idaho. So that's the 15N20 steel we're using. And the other steel, the high carbon steel, is 80 CRV2. Now, all this steel needs to be meticulously cleaned so that there is no oxide, rust, debris, impurities, any kind of microscopic thing that could create some sort of inclusion or imperfection in the pattern welded steel. Well, at least that's sort of the goal. I can be a little meticulous on this, but I prefer to be just to remove as much as possible any potential for a problem with my billets, and I think the results are worth it. So after carefully grinding off the surfaces and then re-wiping and reapplying some WD-40 between each layer, we'll stack this billet up. And it comes to about 30 layers in this initial stack. The next step is to hold all these pieces of steel together while we put it into the forge and forge weld all these pieces of steel into one piece of steel. And the way I do this is simply using my arc welder and running a bead down the stack in several places at least. Now I should apologize in advance. You'll notice a blurry spot in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, and I had some issues with my camera on this project and I ended up switching cameras about halfway through, but before I did that I changed the lens cover on it, which apparently wasn't the right one because it kind of made the video a little bit less quality than it should have been. So I apologize for that in advance, but it's not through the whole video, just so you know. So we've got this billet arc welded together so the layers don't come apart. And in hindsight, I should have ran a bead down the center of the billet as well. The reason for that is because once I got it in the forge and started heating it up, the top or outside layer expanded and bowed out, and that is why I put some borax on the billet for flux. I was not planning to use any borax, just the diesel, dipping it in the diesel and bringing it out. But when that happened, when that layer bowed out like that, it inevitably allowed some atmosphere in between the layer at the top there, and so I used some borax, but only on that spot. So live and learn, I guess. Some things take longer to learn than others. But we've got the billet heated up nice and hot, and we'll start the forge welding process little by little. You want to get the proper heat and then the right amount of compression to ensure that your forge weld is set on a billet. And so we'll repeat this process multiple times. Here I'm trying to make sure that I can get any residual borax off of the billet before I continue, because borax is terrible for your forge lining, and I do have some sacrificial bricks on the inside of this new forge at the bottom, sort of as a sacrificial floor, so that'll be better than nothing, but yeah, borax is just terrible on your forge lining. So now that we've got the forge weld set, I'm switching to some narrower dies that are going to draw out this billet more effectively. And I'm still taking it fairly easy, making sure that we've got this billet forge weld set real nicely. Before I go too much further, I want to grind off the irregularities on the side of the billet, because if I forge this down without addressing this, it'll probably create cold shuts in the side of the billet, which we do not want. So once I've completed that, I can reheat it back up and continue on with drawing this billet out. The goal here is to forge it out long enough to cut it into 3 pieces and restack it. That's only going to be about 90 layers, which doesn't sound real high, but for the pattern that I'm going to do with this billet, that's going to be plenty high of a layer count. In fact, I wouldn't want to go any higher. So I've drawn it out to about 12 inches, a little bit more than that, and let it cool down real slowly in the forge overnight. And that allows us to cut it up in the bandsaw pretty easily into 3 pieces. Of course, we have to repeat the steps of cleaning off the oxides. And I'll start with my angle grinder because the forge scale is really hard on grinding belts, and angle grinding wheels are a lot cheaper to run overall. I'm going to add a layer of 15 and 20 steel between these 3 pieces here. That's going to add sort of a brighter or more prominent component to the pattern when we finish the blade. Now, since we only have 2 joints, or I guess spots in this billet that could be subject to negative issues with atmosphere, I can just run an arc weld bead around those in the entirety and eliminate any possible issue, as you can see there. I still dip it in the diesel because if I have any kind of a pinhole in any of those welds, as that billet cools down, it should suck that diesel in between the layers and preclude any issues with oxygen or any kind of oxide. Once we've got the forge weld set, once again we need to address the sides of the billet and remove that low carbon steel from the welding rod because I don't want that in the billet moving forward. The next step here, where we crush the billet and forge it on the bias to create these C's which we stack into W's, included an accidental discovery that I'll try to explain. Once I got my 90 layers, I wanted to start creating these C's to create W's out of. And that's done by flipping the billet on the bias and forging it down to create those layers to press out in a bowed fashion. But I realized I didn't have much width, and so I was not going to get a very dramatic effect on that. So I started by forging out the width of my billet as normally layered using the round dies. And then with that greater height as forging it on the bias, that would allow me to get a greater or more dramatic effect on these C's that I'm trying to create. What I didn't know is that, or I didn't expect, is that the round dies were going to create some interesting patterning in the billet that stayed with the design even after I crushed it down on the bias. And that's what you see there. You'll see kind of those wavy lines, and so instead of just a U-shaped thing, we've got multiple undulations there to those lines. And that's actually something I'm planning to explore in the future, because that looks very similar to what they call an explosion pattern, which typically you have to go through multiple more steps to get that kind of look. And so I'm curious about what that could be used for using that particular method, and we'll see in the future. So I've got this forged out to a round bar, and now we're going to twist it because we want to bring a representation of that end pattern. We've stacked up 6 pieces of that billet and reforged welded it together, and so we're at a higher layer count, and we're going to twist it so that we get the end grain represented on the side of the blade. I had to twist the billet in cycles, heating one end and then the other. I could have cut it in half and then twisted it, but then I would have lost an additional bit of material where I would have to hold on to it with either the press or the twisting wrench, so I elected to just twist it in one piece. Now that we've twisted it, we can then begin forging it flat and turning it into a usable piece of steel for a knife. Now this is something I ran into on the last time I worked with a crushed W's pattern. That is the extensive surface inclusions, if you will, that open up on a crushed W's twisted billet. That's more so than typical with a twist pattern in my experience, and so you have to grind those out as you go and continue forward. They're always surface level, but you lose some of that outer pattern, unfortunately. So I got through that process, and now I'm working on forging out the handle or the tang on this knife. And instead of doing a tapered tang, I'm going to leave the tang full thickness, and I'm going to etch the entirety of the blade and the tang on this finished knife so that you can see the pattern all the way around the tang. I cut the billet off there and finished forging out the blade. You'll notice the camera's a little blurry, as I mentioned, unfortunately, but this is our normalizing cycle. You see that steel cooling down there. This is resetting the grain size and prepping it for further heat treating processes. I left the camera running so that you could see the recoalescence on this blade here. You'll notice it getting darker and darker as it cools down, and then it will momentarily light back up as it releases the last bit of energy for that steel to complete that phase change. At this point, the steel has been spheroidized, and so it's in a pretty soft, workable state. I'm going to refine the profile on the blade and drill the pinholes for the handle, and also some weight reduction holes in the tang. Going into the quench, you'll notice some forge scale clinging to the side of the blade, looking a darker color than the blade itself actually is. And after tempering, we can grind the blade. I'm excited to see what this pattern is going to look like. Hand sanding, and then also sanding the tang to fit to the handle scales. Since I'm going to etch the tang as well, I have to finish the handle scales to what they're going to be, where they match up to the tang. I didn't show the etching process. I've done that in multiple other videos, but this is the knife I'll put together after etching. And now we can shape the handle, which must be done very carefully so we don't grind or scratch the already finished tang. Alright guys, I'm going to show you some pictures of this knife in just a minute, some close-ups of the Damascus. Thanks for watching the video to the end. I appreciate your support. Don't forget that you can go to my website and check out other high-end custom knives that I have on there, firecreekforge.com, or contact me about a special project of your own. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next video.